let's be real. How many times have we seen a game with insane hype, crazy trailers, everyone saying this is going to be legendary, and then it drops and completely flops? Bugs, broken promises, bad design. Today we're talking about games that had everything to be great and still failed hard. Let's get into it. Do you remember the first time we saw Anthem? It honestly felt like a dream. Flying through the air in powerful exosuits, smooth combat, insane visuals, and a world that looked massive and alive. For a moment, it almost felt like a next-gen Iron Man game mixed with that classic BioWare atmosphere. The freedom of movement looked incredible. The verticality was something few games were offering at the time, and everything about the presentation screamed ambition. Expectations were sky high, especially knowing BioWare's reputation with world-building and immersive experiences. But when the game actually launched, reality hit hard. Endless loading screens broke the flow constantly, bugs showed up everywhere, crashes were frequent, and many of the core systems felt unfinished or poorly thought out. As a looter shooter, Anthem needed a strong and rewarding endgame to survive long-term. That's usually the backbone of games in this genre. Instead, players were met with repetitive missions, shallow progression systems, boring loot, and almost no real incentive to keep playing after a few hours. What hurts the most is that the foundation was there. The flying mechanics felt genuinely great, the combat had flashes of brilliance, and the world itself had potential to grow into something memorable. But the overall vision clearly fell apart during development. Features were cut, direction changed too many times, and the final product felt like a game that never fully came together. In the end, Anthem became one of the most frustrating examples of wasted potential in modern gaming, and now, with its servers officially being shut down, it stands as a reminder that great ideas alone are not enough. If Anthem falling was painful, Marvel's Avengers was straight up shocking. This game launched at the absolute peak of the Marvel Cinematic Universe hype. Infinity War and Endgame were dominating pop culture. This was supposed to be the definitive superhero game, the ultimate Avengers experience. The potential was insane. Big budget, iconic characters, massive audience, perfect timing, everything was lined up for success. And somehow, they still managed to mess it up. What players got was a broken live service game that felt confused from day one. Bugs were everywhere, loading screens never seemed to end, and performance issues were constant. Just like Anthem, this was a game that needed a strong endgame to survive, and it simply didn't have one. Missions became repetitive almost immediately. The loot felt pointless, and progression was shallow and unrewarding. On top of that, the game was filled with strange design decisions, awkward microtransactions, boring enemy variety, and gameplay loops that felt more like chores than fun. Instead of feeling like powerful superheroes, players felt stuck grinding the same content over and over again. It didn't take long for the player base to abandon the game, leaving it practically empty. Seeing a project with this much potential collapse so hard is honestly hard to believe. Marvel's Avengers had the perfect recipe for success, and still managed to turn it into one of the biggest disappointments of its generation. Fallout 76 was announced as the ultimate multiplayer experience from Bethesda. The idea sounded great on paper, a massive post-apocalyptic open world where you could explore with friends, build settlements, and experience a new kind of Fallout together. For longtime fans of the franchise, especially those who loved Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and New Vegas, the concept felt like a dream coming true. But when the game launched, it quickly turned into a nightmare. The release was chaotic. Bugs were everywhere. Servers were unstable, crashes were constant, and performance issues made the game frustrating to play. Worse than that, the world felt empty. Bethesda made the bizarre decision to remove human non-playable characters entirely, relying only on audio logs and terminals to tell the story. For a franchise built around storytelling, choices, and memorable characters, this decision felt completely out of touch. The problems didn't stop there. The game became infamous for its collector's edition scandal, where a promised canvas bag was replaced with a cheap nylon one. That moment symbolized the entire launch, broken promises and disappointed players. Even though Fallout 76 has improved over time and is far more playable today, the damage was already done. For many players, the game became a lasting symbol of wasted potential and broken trust. Godfall arrived with insane visual appeal and quickly became one of the main showcase titles for the PlayStation 5. It was marketed as a looter slasher, a loot-focused action RPG with flashy armor designs, heavy melee combat, and visuals that screamed next generation. Everything about its presentation made it look like a major launch title meant to show what the new hardware was capable of. But once the initial shine wore off, the problems became impossible to ignore. Behind all the visual spectacle, Godfall felt empty. Missions were highly repetitive, environments lacked variety, and progression quickly became monotonous. The story barely existed, serving only as a thin excuse to push players from one fight to the next. Characters had no real personality or emotional weight, often feeling more like talking suits of armor than actual people. To make things worse, the game suffered from performance issues, including noticeable frame rate drops, something that felt unacceptable for a title meant to represent a new generation of consoles. Instead of feeling like a full, carefully crafted experience, Godfall came across as a glorified tech demo. Much like other Generation Showcase games before it, the focus on visuals overshadowed everything else, resulting in a game that looked impressive at first glance but failed to deliver meaningful depth or long-term engagement. Babylon's Fall was supposed to be a big deal. An action role-playing game developed by Platinum Games, the studio behind critically acclaimed titles like Nier Automata. Just that name alone was enough to create huge expectations. Early trailers showed fast-paced combat, fluid movement, and a game that looked like it could deliver the kind of stylish action the studio is known for. But what players actually got was a massive disappointment. Despite being marketed as a modern title, Babylon's Fall launched with visuals that looked outdated, closer to a PlayStation 3 game than anything from a new generation. Textures were low quality, environments felt empty, and character models lacked detail. Visually, it was hard to believe this was a full-priced release. Even worse, the combat, which should have been the game's strongest point, quickly became shallow and repetitive. Instead of deep mechanics or satisfying progression, gameplay boiled down to mashing buttons endlessly with little variety or challenge. The live service structure failed to keep players engaged, offering no compelling endgame and no real reason to stick around. The result was brutal. The player base vanished almost immediately, and the game's servers were shut down in less than a year after launch. For a studio like Platinum Games, this was a rare and embarrassing misstep. Babylon's Fall became a clear example of how even talented developers can stumble hard when chasing trends instead of focusing on what they do best. Redfall looked like a sure hit on paper, an open-world vampire shooter from Arcane Studios, the same team behind Dishonored and Prey. The concept sounded strong, hunting vampires at night with friends, each character having unique abilities, all wrapped in Arcane's signature immersive design. Even with the live service angle, expectations were still high because of the studio's track record. Then the game launched, and it was a disaster. On release, Redfall was locked at 30 frames per second on new generation consoles, which already felt unacceptable. On top of that, the game was full of bugs, glitches, and technical issues. Enemy artificial intelligence was laughably bad, often standing still or reacting in bizarre ways, completely breaking immersion. For a studio known for smart level design and enemy behavior, this was shocking. The problems didn't stop there. The game required an online connection even for solo play, which frustrated many players. Missions were extremely repetitive. The open world felt empty, and boredom set in after just a few hours. It never felt like a true Arcane game, more like a rushed project pulled in the wrong direction. Although a 60 frames per second patch eventually arrived and public apologies were made, the damage was already done. Redfall became another painful example of a talented studio losing its identity and delivering a game that failed to live up to both its potential and its legacy. The Day Before is easily one of the most bizarre cases in modern gaming. Out of nowhere, the game appeared with trailers showing photorealistic graphics, a massive open world, zombies, and a survival experience that looked like a perfect mix of The Division and The Last of Us. It quickly became one of the most wishlisted games on Steam, with hype reaching absurd levels. Then the game actually launched and everything fell apart. What players received had almost nothing to do with what was shown in the trailers. Instead of an open-world survival MMO, the game released as a generic extraction shooter with empty maps, terrible performance, and bugs everywhere. The visuals were a massive downgrade, gameplay felt unfinished, and the overall experience was barely playable. Refund requests flooded in almost immediately. Things somehow got even worse. Just 4 days after launch, the studio behind the game announced it was shutting down, claiming financial failure. Shortly after that, the servers were taken offline in less than 2 months. The entire project collapsed almost instantly. The day before didn't just disappoint, it became one of the biggest scams the industry has ever seen. It's a clear reminder of why blind hype is dangerous and why players should always be cautious with games that promise everything but show very little real gameplay. Forspoken was positioned as the next big hit from Square Enix. Early trailers showed a protagonist flying across a massive open world using magical parkour, casting flashy spells, and moving with a level of freedom that looked genuinely exciting. Visually, it screamed next generation, and many people expected it to be a major step forward for open-world action games. But once players got their hands on it, the illusion quickly faded. That huge open world turned out to be empty and lifeless, filled with generic locations and very little meaningful content. Exploration felt pointless, and the sense of discovery was almost non-existent. The dialogue didn't help either. Conversations were often awkward, repetitive, and painfully forced, to the point where many players wanted to mute the game just to keep going. While the movement system had some solid ideas and the visuals could look impressive at times, everything else felt unfinished. Combat lacked depth, the story failed to engage, and the overall experience felt like a product rushed out the door without enough care or polish. Instead of feeling like a bold new franchise, Forspoken came across as a missed opportunity, a game with good concepts that were never properly developed. In the end, Forspoken became another painful example of massive potential being wasted, leaving players wondering how a project with this much backing ended up feeling so incomplete. The Saints Row reboot from 2022 was supposed to bring the franchise back to life. The promise was a fresh start, a new, open-world, deep character customization, over-the-top action, and the same chaotic humor that made the series stand out in the first place. The idea was to build your own gang from scratch, with a modern tone but still keeping that unmistakable Saints Row identity. Expectations were mixed after the trailers, but many fans were still hopeful. That hope didn't last long after launch. The game arrived in a rough state. Bugs were everywhere, some of them completely breaking missions. The open world was large, but felt empty and lifeless, with very little to do beyond repetitive activities. Visually, it often looked outdated, closer to a previous generation game than a modern reboot. The characters, who were supposed to be the new face of the franchise, were forgettable, and the dialogue felt forced, constantly trying to be funny without actually landing the jokes. Combat didn't help either. It was shallow, repetitive, and quickly became boring. Instead of feeling chaotic and fun, the gameplay loop felt tired and uninspired, like an old formula pretending to be something new. In the end, the reboot felt less like a revival and more like a cash grab, failing to capture what made Saints Row special in the first place. Skull and Bones was supposed to be the ultimate pirate game. Marketed as the spiritual successor to Assassin's Creed Black Flag, it promised epic naval battles, life on the high seas, and a deep pirate fantasy that fans had been asking for years. On paper, it sounded like the natural evolution of what Ubisoft had already done right before. Expectations were high, especially after so much time in development, but the final result was incredibly underwhelming. After nearly a decade in production, the game launched at a full AAA price while feeling strangely hollow. Instead of a true pirate sandbox, players got a repetitive grinding simulator. Exploration was extremely limited. You couldn't freely roam your ship, swim in the ocean, or properly explore islands like in Black Flag. Most of the time, you were locked into predefined paths with very little freedom. The naval combat, which should have been the highlight, quickly became repetitive and lacked depth. Progression felt slow and artificial, clearly designed to stretch playtime rather than create meaningful experiences. For a game about pirates, the sense of adventure was almost completely missing. In the end, Skull and Bones felt like a project that lost its identity after too many reworks and direction changes. What should have been a triumphant pirate fantasy turned into one of Ubisoft's most disappointing releases, a game that took forever to arrive and still failed to deliver on its core promise. Star Wars Outlaws sounded like a dream on paper, an open-world Star Wars game where you play as an outlaw, exploring the galaxy, dealing with criminal syndicates, pulling off heists, and living that Han Solo-style fantasy. The visuals looked great, the reputation system with different factions seemed promising, and flying across planets gave the impression of a massive, immersive adventure made for fans of the franchise. But once again, reality didn't live up to the promise. The gameplay itself felt painfully generic. Combat worked, but it lacked impact and personality. Shooting felt weak, stealth missions were frustrating, and the overall mechanics felt dated and uninspired. Even though the open world looked beautiful, it felt empty, with very little meaningful interaction or variety to keep players engaged. Technical issues made things even worse. Bugs, crashes, and performance problems constantly broke immersion. One of the biggest controversies came from the early access versions of the game, where players who paid extra to play earlier discovered that a Day 1 patch corrupted their save files, forcing them to restart their progress entirely. Paying more only to lose your save was a huge blow to player trust. In the end, Star Wars Outlaws became another example of massive potential wasted, a universe full of possibilities reduced to a safe, repetitive experience that failed to capture the magic and depth fans were hoping for. And yeah, that's the list. Games that had massive hype, huge potential, and every chance to be great but still ended up as huge disappointments. Some of them tried to fix things later, some disappeared completely, and others became cautionary tales the industry won't forget anytime soon. Now I want to hear from you. Which game on this list hurt the most? And is there another one you remember that launched with insane hype and completely let you down? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like, it really helps the channel more than you think. Subscribe for more honest takes and deep dives into gaming history, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching!